don't even have the money to hire a lawyer." My father's voice carried across the courtroom, sharp and amused, like he was telling a joke everyone else was too polite to laugh at. A few people did anyway. Not loudly, just enough. I stood there alone at the defense table, hands resting lightly against the wood fingers, steady in a way that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with training. I didn't look at him. I didn't give him the satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, one arm draped over the side like he owned the room. "She thinks she can walk in here by herself," he added, shaking his head. "No counsel, no case, just a uniform and attitude." Something shifted behind me, a quiet murmur, curiosity. Then the judge spoke. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice even measured, "that will be enough." My father smirked, but he sat back. The judge turned his gaze to me. "Ms. Carter," he said, pausing just long enough for the room to settle. "You understand you have the right to representation." "Yes, Your Honor." "And you are choosing to proceed alone." "Yes, sir?" He studied me for a moment longer than most people ever did. Not in judgment, in recognition. Then he nodded once. "Very well," he said. "For the record, she won't be needing one." That was when everything changed. I didn't react. But across the aisle, my father's attorney froze. Completely. He had been flipping through a folder, casual, confident, practiced. Now his fingers had stopped mid-page. His eyes narrowed, then widened just slightly, like he had just seen something he hadn't expected to find. "Wait," he murmured under his breath. My father leaned toward him. "What is it?" The lawyer didn't answer right away. He just stared at the page. Then, quieter, almost to himself. "Oh my God." I kept my eyes forward. But I felt it. The shift. Like pressure dropping before a storm. The Portsmouth County Courthouse smelled exactly the way I remembered old wood floor polish paper that had absorbed decades of arguments and verdicts and lives rearranged by a single sentence. It was colder than outside. Or maybe that was just the way rooms like this always felt. I had arrived early, sat alone, watched people come and go, their voices low, their footsteps softened by the weight of where they were. A bailiff nodded at me when I walked in. His eyes lingered for half a second on the ribbons above my left pocket. Recognition. Or maybe just habit. Either way, he didn't say anything. I preferred it that way. I didn't come here to be thanked. I came because I had to. 2 weeks earlier, I had been kneeling in my backyard trying to fix a broken fence panel that Knox, my old shepherd, had pushed through, chasing something only he could see. The wood was warped, the nails bent. My knee had started aching again, that deep, familiar throb that came with weather changes or memories. Sometimes it was hard to tell which. That's when the envelope arrived. Thick, official, unmistakable. Portsmouth Civil Court. I didn't open it right away. I already knew who it was from. I wiped my hands on my jeans, leaned back against the fence post, and let Knox rest his head against my leg. He was slower now, quieter, but still loyal in a way that didn't ask questions. I guess it's time I said to him. He didn't answer. He never needed to. Inside the letter was brief, clinical. Petitioner Daniel Carter. Respondent Emily Carter. My father was suing me. Not for money. For control. Family assets, property rights, preservation of legacy. There were other words, too. Irresponsibility. Absence. Conduct unbecoming. I remember reading that line twice. Then laughing once sharp and dry. Conduct unbecoming, I repeated out loud, like saying it might make it less ridiculous. Knox lifted his head, ears twitching. It's fine, I told him. We've been called worse. I folded the letter carefully, not because it deserved care, because I did. That night I didn't sleep much. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold before I remembered to drink it. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. I thought about calling someone. A lawyer, a friend, anyone. But every number I considered came with the same weight. Explanation. And I was tired of explaining myself. So I didn't call anyone. Instead, I stood up, walked into the bedroom, and opened the old footlocker at the end of the bed. The hinges creaked the way they always had. Inside, everything was exactly where I left it. Uniform, folded. Medals, wrapped. Documents, sealed. I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling the texture, the history woven into something so ordinary, it barely looked like anything at all. People always expect it to feel heavier. It doesn't. Not in your hands. Only when you carry it. I closed the lid. And I knew. If this was going to happen, it was going to happen on truth alone. The drive to the courthouse took 45 minutes. Long enough for doubt to try its usual tricks. You should have hired someone. You're not ready for this. He's going to win. I let the thoughts come. Then let them go. Training teaches you that. You don't fight every thought, you acknowledge it, you move forward anyway. The sky had been overcast that morning, the kind of gray that flattens everything: roads, buildings, distance. Even the courthouse looked smaller under it, like it had shrunk into itself. I parked near the steps. Sat there for a moment. Hands on the wheel. Breathing. In. Out. Then I stepped out of the car and walked inside. And now here I was, standing across from the man who had spent most of my life deciding what I was worth based on who was watching. My father looked older. Grayer. But not softer. Never softer. He adjusted his cufflinks as his attorney finally leaned in and whispered something to him. What my father asked irritated. "What is it?" The lawyer hesitated, then shook his head. Nothing, he said quickly, just something I need to verify. But his voice had changed. Confidence replaced with something tighter. My father didn't notice. He never noticed things like that. The judge tapped his pen lightly against the bench. "Counsel," he said, "are you prepared to proceed?" The lawyer blinked, straightened. "Yes, Your Honor." But his eyes flicked toward me again. Just for a second. Like he was trying to place a face he should have recognized sooner. I met his gaze. Held it. Didn't smile. Didn't look away. And for the first time since I walked into that room, he looked uncertain. The clerk called the case formally. Voices lowered. Papers shifted. And somewhere behind me someone whispered, "Why is she alone?" I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because the answer was simple. I wasn't alone. I just wasn't standing next to anyone. And there's a difference. One my father had never understood. But he was about to. My father always believed that a life could be measured from the outside. Not by what you carried, but by what people could see. Clean lawn, straight fence, firm handshake, the kind of reputation that traveled ahead of you before you even entered a room. I learned that early. Not because he taught me directly, but because of what he chose to notice and what he didn't. When I was 12, I won a regional science competition. It wasn't flashy, no cameras, just a certificate, a small plaque, and a handshake from a man in a suit who smelled faintly of aftershave and coffee. I remember holding that plaque all the way home, turning it slightly in the sunlight that came through the car window, watching the engraved letters catch the light. I didn't say anything. I was waiting. That evening a neighbor stopped by. Mr. Donnelly, retired, always wore the same faded baseball cap and talked too loudly. "How are the kids doing?" he asked. My father leaned against the porch rail, coffee in hand. "Good," he said. "My son's got a real shot at varsity this year." I stood in the doorway, still holding the plaque. He didn't lie. He just didn't mention me. That was the first time I understood something I wouldn't be able to unlearn. You don't always disappear because someone pushes you out. Sometimes they just never look in your direction. Years later, when I told him I was enlisting, he had that same look on his face. Not anger. Not exactly. Something colder. Disapproval sharpened by embarrassment. "We don't do that," he said. I was 21, old enough to sign my own papers, young enough to still hope he'd ask why. Do what I asked. "Run off like that," he replied. "Join something that puts you in the spotlight for the wrong reasons." "The wrong reasons?" I repeated. He nodded. People talk. There it was again. People. Not "you'll get hurt." Not "I'm worried." Just people. I remember standing in the kitchen, the enlistment papers folded neatly in my hand, realizing that he wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of how it would look. "I'm not doing this for people," I said. "That's exactly the problem," he snapped. We didn't yell. That wasn't our style. Our arguments were quieter than that. More precise, like cuts instead of blows. "You're throwing away stability," he continued. "You had options: college, work, a normal life. I am choosing a life. A reckless one. A meaningful one." He shook his head like I was missing something obvious. No, he said, you're choosing attention. That stayed with me. Not because it hurt. Because it told me everything I needed to know. He would never understand. Not what I was doing. Not why. And eventually, not who I was. The day I left, he didn't come to the airport. My mother did. She stood there with her hands clasped tightly in front of her like she didn't know what to do with them. You can still change your mind, she said. I smiled. Not because I was amused. Because I didn't want her to worry. I won't, I said gently. She nodded. Then hugged me longer than she ever had before. Call when you can, she whispered. I will. I meant it. At the time, training was harder than anything I had imagined. Not physically. That part you adapt to. It was the quiet moments. The ones in between. When your body stops moving but your mind doesn't. That's when everything you left behind tries to follow you. There were nights I sat on the edge of a narrow bunk writing letters I never sent. Dear Dad, I made it through today. Dear Dad, you were wrong. Dear Dad, I wish you'd asked me why. I folded those letters carefully, then tucked them away. Somewhere between pride and silence. Years passed. Deployments came and went. I learned how to move through chaos without letting it settle inside me. How to make decisions quickly, cleanly, without hesitation. How to carry responsibility without needing recognition. Because recognition wasn't something I expected anymore. Not from him. Not from anyone. I stopped calling as often. Then less. Then not at all. Not out of anger. Just distance. Like a shoreline you can still see but no longer feel connected to. When my grandfather passed, I didn't make it back in time. I was halfway across the world, standing on a flight line that smelled like fuel and dust, listening to a message come through on a static-filled radio. He's gone. That was it. No ceremony. No closure. Just a sentence. I stood there for a long time after that. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing. Later that night, I opened my footlocker and took out the small compass he had given me when I was a kid. Always know where you are, he used to say, even if no one else does. I held it in my palm, watching the needle settle. Steady. Certain. Unlike everything else. I came home years later to a house that felt smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. My father greeted me at the door. Brief nod. No hug. You're back, he said. I am. He stepped aside to let me in. We sat at the table. Across from each other. Like strangers who shared a last name. You didn't have to stay away that long, he said. I looked at him. I didn't stay away, I replied. I just stopped going where I wasn't wanted. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. It's accurate. Silence settled between us. Heavy. Familiar. He looked at the uniform folded neatly over the back of my chair. You still wearing that, he asked. Yes. He nodded slowly. People notice, he said. Of course they do. That was always the point. Just not the one he thought. The years after that were quieter. We didn't fight. We didn't talk much either. A few calls. Short visits. Enough to say we hadn't completely lost contact. But not enough to fix anything. Because fixing something requires both people to see it as broken. And my father never believed anything was broken. Not really. Not in a way that mattered. So when the court papers arrived, I wasn't surprised. Disappointed maybe, but not surprised. Because this was exactly how he handled things he didn't understand. Control. Authority. Structure. If something didn't fit the image, you reshape it. Or remove it. And I had stopped fitting a long time ago. Back in the courtroom, my father shifted in his seat, unaware of how close he was to losing something he thought he had already won. His lawyer shuffled papers again. Less confidently now. The judge leaned forward slightly. Let's proceed, he said. And just like that, the past stopped being memory and became evidence. I didn't hire a lawyer. That was the part everyone seemed to understand the least. It wasn't the uniform, not the silence, not even the fact that I hadn't spoken to my father in months before he filed the case. It was that I chose to stand there alone. The clerk had asked me twice when I filed my response. You're sure about this, ma'am? She wasn't rude, just careful, the way people get when they think you might be making a mistake you can't take back. Yes, I said. These cases can get complicated, she added, lowering her voice slightly, especially when it's family. I know. You'll be going up against legal counsel. I know. She hesitated, then leaned in just a little. You could still request a public defender or... No, I said not unkindly, I won't need one. She studied me for a second. Not judging, just trying to understand. Then she nodded and stamped the paperwork. Good luck, she said. I thanked her. But luck didn't have anything to do with it. Back at the house, Knox watched me move through the kitchen like he always did, quiet, patient, tracking me with tired eyes that had seen enough of the world to know when something was off. You think this is a bad idea? I asked him. His tail thumped once against the floor. Neutral. That was fair. I set the folder down on the table and opened it again, even though I already knew what was inside. Receipts, records, dates, everything clean, everything documented. Not because I expected to use it. Because I had learned a long time ago that if you didn't keep your own record, someone else would write your story for you. And they wouldn't get it right. The truth was, I could have hired a lawyer. I had the money. Not a lot, but enough. Years of saving. Quiet, consistent. The kind of financial discipline you learn when you don't expect anyone to catch you if you fall. But hiring someone would mean explaining everything. Where the money came from. What I did. Why I did it. And I wasn't interested in turning my life into something someone else could argue on my behalf. This wasn't a technical problem. It wasn't about loopholes or strategy. It was about truth. And truth doesn't need translation. The morning before the hearing, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I was nervous. Because I couldn't sleep. The sky outside was still dark, the kind of pre-dawn quiet that makes everything feel suspended, like the world hasn't decided what kind of day it's going to be yet. I made coffee, sat at the table, opened the footlocker again. I hadn't planned to wear the uniform. That had changed sometime during the night. Not suddenly. Just quietly. Like a decision that had been waiting for me to catch up to it. I lifted it out carefully, smoothing the fabric with my hands. The ribbons were aligned. The seams pressed. Nothing flashy. Nothing exaggerated. Just honest. Knox padded into the room, nails clicking softly against the floor. He sat beside me, leaning his weight into my leg. You remember this? I asked, scratching behind his ear. He didn't answer. But he stayed. That was enough. Putting it on felt familiar in a way nothing else did anymore. Not comforting. Not exactly. But grounding. Like stepping back into something that didn't shift under your feet. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone impressive. I saw someone accountable. There's a difference. I packed the folder last, slid it into a worn leather case that had traveled with me through more places than I cared to count. Every scratch on it had a story. Most of them I'd never told. I picked up the car keys, paused at the door, then turned back and grabbed one more thing from the footlocker. The compass. I held it in my palm for a second, watching the needle steady itself. Always pointing somewhere certain. Even when everything else isn't. I slipped it into my pocket. Not for luck. For memory. The drive to the courthouse was quiet. No music. No radio. Just the low hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of loose gravel when I turned onto smaller roads. I passed the same diner my father used to take us to on Sundays. Same sign. Same faded red paint. Different feeling. Back then, he'd sit in the booth near the window talking to whoever happened to stop by. Business, reputation, community. He was good at that. People liked him. Respected him. Listened to him. I used to think that meant something. Now I understood it meant something different. Being heard isn't the same as being known. When I pulled into the courthouse lot, there were already cars lined up in uneven rows. I parked near the edge, took a breath, and stepped out. The air was cooler than I expected. Sharp. Clean. Like something had shifted overnight. A janitor stood near the entrance, sweeping the steps with slow, deliberate strokes. He glanced up as I approached. His eyes moved briefly to my uniform, then back to my face. Morning, he said. Morning. He nodded once. No questions. No assumptions. Just acknowledgement. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. Inside the courthouse was already alive. Not loud, but full. People moving in controlled ways. Conversations kept low like everyone understood this wasn't a place for volume. I took a seat near the back at first. Watched. Observed. That was another thing you learn over time. You don't rush into a room and make yourself known. You let the room show you what it is first. The lawyers stood out immediately. Confident. Comfortable. Their space. Their language. Their rhythm. I didn't belong to that world. And I didn't need to. When my father arrived, I saw him before he saw me. Same posture. Same controlled movements. His suit was pressed perfectly like always. Appearances mattered. Some things never change. He was talking to his lawyer, nodding occasionally, his expression set in that familiar way, assured certain already halfway to victory. He didn't look around. Didn't search the room. Didn't look for me. Why would he? In his mind, this was already decided. When the clerk called the case, I stood. Walked forward. Took my place at the table. Alone. I could feel it then, the attention. Not hostile. Just curious. A woman in uniform, no counsel, standing across from a man with a lawyer and a case built on confidence. It didn't make sense to them. That was fine. It didn't need to. Across the room, my father finally looked at me. Really looked. His eyes paused on the uniform, then narrowed slightly. You didn't have to wear that, he said under his breath. I met his gaze. I didn't wear it for you. He exhaled sharply like he had expected a different answer. Or maybe no answer at all. The judge entered. Everyone rose. And just like that, the room settled into place. Structured. Defined. Ready. This was where stories changed. Or stayed exactly the same. Depending on who was willing to tell the truth. As I stood there, hands resting lightly on the table, I realized something my father had never understood. Standing alone doesn't mean you have nothing. Sometimes, it means you're the only thing you need. And for the first time since I walked into that courthouse, I felt completely steady. The courtroom settled into a kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Like everyone was waiting for something to confirm what they already believed. That I didn't belong there. That this would be quick. That I would lose. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced down at the file in front of him, then looked up. Counsel, he said, you may proceed. My father's lawyer stood smoothly buttoning his jacket as he stepped forward. Confident again. Or trying to be. Thank you, Your Honor. His voice carried well. Practiced. Controlled. The kind of voice that had convinced people of things long before they understood them. We are here today to address a matter of family responsibility and stewardship. He began pacing slowly. My client, Mr. Daniel Carter, has brought this case forward out of concern for the preservation of his family's legacy, both in terms of property and reputation. He paused, letting the words settle. Then he turned just slightly toward me. Unfortunately, he continued, the respondent, Ms. Emily Carter, has demonstrated a consistent pattern of absence, neglect, and conduct that has, whether intentionally or not, reflected poorly on that legacy. There it was. Clean. Polished. Wrong. I didn't move. Didn't interrupt. I let him speak. That's something else you learn over time. You don't stop someone when they're building a case that can't hold its own weight. You let it finish. She left, he said more directly now. Years ago. Without regard for her family's standing in the community, without consistent contact, without participation in family obligations. My father nodded slightly beside him. Agreement. Validation. The lawyer continued. While my client has maintained the family property, the family name, and the expectations associated with both, Ms. Carter has chosen a path that is at best disconnected and at worst damaging. A few heads in the gallery shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough to show that the narrative was landing. That was his job. And he was good at it. He stopped pacing and faced the judge fully. We are not here to punish Ms. Carter, he said, his tone softening just enough to sound reasonable. We are here to correct a situation that has become untenable. My client is seeking full authority over the Carter family assets in order to ensure they are managed in a way that reflects the values this family has upheld for generations. Values. Another word that sounds solid until you look too closely at what it's actually holding up. The judge leaned back slightly. "Thank you, counsel," he said. "Mr. Carter, do you wish to add anything?" My father didn't hesitate. He stood. Of course he did. He had never been one to let someone else speak for him when there was a room full of people listening. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, stepping forward just enough to be seen more clearly. He didn't look at me right away. He addressed the judge. But his words were meant for me. "She walked away," he said. "That's the simplest way to put it." There was no anger in his voice. That would have been easier to understand. This was something else. Disappointment sharpened into certainty. She left this family, this community, everything we built, and for what he gestured toward me briefly, for something that no one here asked for. I felt the weight of the room shift again. Subtle, but real. He turned then. Looked at me directly. "You don't get to disappear for years and then walk back in like nothing happened," he said. "I didn't disappear," I replied quietly. He scoffed. "You might as well have." The judge raised a hand slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, "please keep your comments focused." My father nodded, but only barely. "This isn't complicated," he continued. "She made choices that reflect on all of us. People notice. They talk. Of course they do. They ask why my daughter isn't around," he went on. "Why she chose that life instead of staying here doing something respectable, something normal." Normal. That word again. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Recognition. "And now," he said, his voice rising just slightly, "she stands here, no lawyer, no real defense, expecting this court to believe she's been acting in the best interest of this family." He shook his head. "She hasn't." The silence that followed was heavier than anything he had said. Because it wasn't just his words. It was everything behind them. Years of assumption. Years of not asking. Years of deciding who I was without ever needing to confirm it. The judge turned his attention to me. "Ms. Carter," he said, "you may respond." I stood. Slowly. Not because I needed time. Because I wasn't in a hurry. "I didn't abandon my family," I said. My voice didn't carry the way my father's had. It didn't need to. "I served my country," I continued. "And I stayed away because I was made to understand that my presence was unwelcome." A ripple moved through the room. My father shifted. "That's not what I said," he snapped. I looked at him. "You said people would talk," I replied. "You said I made you look bad." "That's not the same thing." "It is when you say it enough times." The judge watched both of us carefully. Not interrupting. Letting it unfold. "Ms. Carter," he said, "can you address the claims regarding your absence and lack of involvement with family property?" "Yes, sir." I reached down, opened the leather case, and pulled out the folder. Not dramatically. Just deliberately. "I have records," I said, "documentation of my involvement." My father's lawyer leaned forward slightly. Interested again. Concerned, maybe? I handed the documents to the clerk, who passed them up to the bench. The judge began to review them. Slowly. Carefully. No one spoke. The room held its breath. "These payments," the judge said after a moment, tapping one page lightly, "have been consistent." "Yes, sir." "And they originate from an account under your name." "Yes, sir." My father let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "That doesn't mean anything," he said. "Anyone can send money. That doesn't mean she's present." The judge didn't look up. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you'll wait." I stood there, hands at my sides, feeling the familiar steadiness settle in again. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. The truth doesn't need to rush. It arrives when it's ready. The judge continued reviewing the documents, flipping through page after page. Dates. Amounts. Consistency. Things that don't lie. "Ms. Carter," he said, finally looking up, "you've maintained financial responsibility for the property despite not residing here." "Yes, sir." Why, there it was. The question. Simple. Direct. I considered it for a second, then answered honestly. "Because it mattered," I said, "to my grandfather, and because no one else was doing it." My father scoffed again. Always the martyr. I turned my head slightly. Met his eyes. You never asked, I said. That landed. Harder than anything else had. He opened his mouth. Closed it. For just a second. He didn't have an answer. The judge set the folder down, folded his hands, and looked at my father. Mr. Carter, he said, his tone measured, you've made several assertions regarding your daughter's conduct and its impact on your family's reputation. That's correct. And you are confident, the judge continued, that you are fully aware of that conduct. My father straightened. Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. The kind that comes from never having to question your own perspective. The judge held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded once. Very well, he said. A pause. Small, but heavy. We'll explore that? Across the aisle, my father's lawyer shifted in his seat. Uncomfortable now. Not because he knew what was coming, because he suspected. And sometimes, that's worse. I stood there, breathing evenly, feeling the moment settle into place. The past had been spoken. The assumptions laid out. The story my father believed, fully told. Now, all that was left was the part he never saw. The silence didn't break all at once. It thinned, like fog lifting, just enough for shapes to start forming underneath. The judge reached to his right and pulled a separate file from the stack. It was thinner than the others, marked with a red tab at the top corner. Different. Important. My father's lawyer noticed it immediately. I saw it in the way his posture changed: shoulders, tightening chin, lifting slightly like he was trying to see the page from across the room. Your Honor, he began carefully, if there are additional documents. There are, the judge said, not looking up, and they're relevant. The lawyer sat back. Slowly. Like something had just shifted beneath him and he wasn't sure where the ground was anymore. The judge opened the file and scanned the first page. His expression didn't change. But his voice did. Quieter. More deliberate. Mr. Carter, he said, you've stated that your daughter's absence and conduct have brought embarrassment to your family. That's correct, my father replied. And you've indicated that she has not contributed meaningfully to your family or this community. Yes? The judge nodded once. Are you familiar with your daughter's service record? My father waved a hand dismissively. I know she enlisted, that's enough. A pause. Is it, the judge asked? Something in the room shifted again. Subtle, but undeniable. The judge turned a page. Ms. Carter, he said, I'm going to place several items on the record. If anything I state is inaccurate, you may correct me. Yes, sir. I didn't need to correct anything. I already knew what was in that file. I just hadn't expected it to matter here. The judge looked back at my father. Mr. Carter, he said, are you aware that your daughter was formally recognized by the Department of Defense for her role in coordinating a civilian evacuation operation during Hurricane Elias? My father blinked. What? The lawyer beside him stiffened. The judge continued, voice steady. Ms. Carter served as the logistics lead for a multi-agency evacuation involving 47 civilians trapped in a flood zone. Communications were compromised. Infrastructure was unstable. She coordinated ground and air transport routes under those conditions. He glanced briefly at the page. No fatalities, he added. The room went completely still. Not quiet. Still. Like something had just been placed in the center of it that no one knew how to move around. That's not possible, my father said, shaking his head. She never told us anything like that. The judge didn't react. That does not negate the fact that it occurred. My father turned to his lawyer. Is that real? He demanded. The lawyer swallowed. Yes, he said quietly. It's documented. My father stared at him. Then back at the judge. Then at me. Like he was trying to reconcile three different realities that didn't match. The judge turned another page. There's more, he said. Of course there was. There always is. For the past 8 years, he continued, property taxes associated with the Carter family estate have been paid in full and on time. My father straightened slightly. I've said that. I've maintained. They were not paid by you, the judge said. Silence. They were paid by Ms. Carter, he continued, from her active duty income, and later from her disability pension following discharge. My father's mouth opened, then closed. No, he said, that's not. It is, the judge replied. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest again. Not fear. Not even discomfort. Just the weight of something private becoming public. I had never intended for any of this to be said out loud. It wasn't something I did for recognition. It was something that needed to be done. And I was the one who did it. That was enough. You're telling me, my father said slowly, his voice rougher now, she's been paying for that property all this time? Yes. And no one told me. The judge looked at him. Did you ask? That question landed harder than anything else had. My father didn't answer. Because there wasn't an answer that would hold up. The judge continued. In addition, he said, Ms. Carter has made recurring anonymous contributions to the county's Veterans Relief Fund. A few heads in the gallery turned. Recognition. Surprise. Something else. Those funds, the judge went on, were used to provide emergency housing and support for displaced families, including several within this county. He paused, then added almost gently, the anonymity was only lifted due to financial verification requirements in this case. My father looked at me again. Really looked this time. Not at the uniform. Not at the situation. At me. You did that, he asked. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't even angry. It was uncertain. I met his gaze. I didn't think it mattered who did it, I said. The judge closed the file slowly, carefully, like he understood the weight of what had just been said. Mr. Carter, he said, you've argued that your daughter has brought embarrassment to your family and community. My father didn't respond. He just stared. At the bench. At nothing. At this time, the judge continued, the evidence suggests the opposite. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled. Heavy. Final. My father's lawyer leaned forward, voice low, strained. Your Honor, we would like to request a brief recess to review. Denied, the judge said calmly. We are well past that. The lawyer sat back. Defeated. Not dramatically. Just quietly. My father's hands were clenched on the table now. Knuckles pale. I remembered those hands. Steady. Strong. Certain. Now they looked unsure. He shook his head again, slower this time. I didn't know, he said. Not to the judge. Not to the room. To himself. I felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Something more complicated than that. Because this wasn't about winning. It never had been. You didn't ask, I said. My voice was steady, but softer now. Not defensive. Just true. The judge let the silence stretch. He understood it. Understood that this moment wasn't about legal arguments anymore. It was about something else. Something harder to measure. Mr. Carter, he said finally, can you explain to this court how your daughter's actions constitute embarrassment? My father didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the story he had built didn't match the facts in front of him. And for the first time, he didn't have a way to fix that. I stood there, hands still breathing, even feeling the room change around me. Not in my favor. Not against me. Just clearer. The truth hadn't raised its voice. It hadn't argued. It hadn't defended itself. It had simply arrived. And once it did, there was no room left for anything else. My father looked at me again. And this time, he didn't see what he expected. He saw what had always been there. He just hadn't been looking. The courtroom didn't return to normal after that. It couldn't. Something had shifted too far to be put back the way it was. People were still sitting in the same seats. The judge was still behind the bench. The same walls, the same light filtering through the high windows. But the story, the one everyone thought they understood, had broken. And when a story breaks, people don't know where to look. My father sat there staring at nothing. Not the judge. Not me. Just somewhere in between. Like he was trying to find a version of events that still made sense. I didn't know, he said again. Quieter this time. The words didn't carry the way they had before. They didn't need to. They were heavier now. The judge folded his hands in front of him. Mr. Carter, he said not unkindly, that has become clear. There was no judgment in his tone. Just fact. My father's lawyer shifted beside him, clearing his throat softly. Your Honor. He began carefully choosing each word while we acknowledged the additional information presented. The core issue remains. The core issue, the judge interrupted, is that your client has made claims of abandonment and reputational harm that are not supported by the evidence. The lawyer stopped, because there was nothing to say to that. My father finally looked up at me. His eyes were different now. Not angry, not defensive, just uncertain, like he was seeing a stranger, or maybe realizing that I had always been one. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. There it was. The question he should have asked years ago. The question that might have changed everything. I held his gaze. You never asked. I didn't say it harshly. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't require force. He leaned back slightly like the answer had physically moved him. I thought, he started, then stopped. Because whatever he thought didn't matter anymore. The judge picked up his pen again, tapped it once against the desk. A small sound. But it brought the room back into focus. Before I issue a ruling, he said, I want to be clear about what this court has established. He looked down briefly at his notes, then back up. Ms. Carter has maintained consistent financial responsibility for the family property. He glanced toward me. She has demonstrated ongoing contribution to the community through verified charitable actions. Then back to my father. And she has served this country with distinction, including actions that directly benefited members of this very community. He let that settle. Then added, there is no evidence before this court that her conduct has caused harm to your family's reputation. A pause. Measured. Intentional. In fact, he said the evidence suggests the opposite. My father closed his eyes for a second. Just a second. But long enough for something to shift behind them. The judge straightened slightly. This court does not find sufficient grounds to transfer authority over the Carter family assets. There it was. The ruling. Clean. Clear. Final. Ownership and control will remain as currently documented. He lifted the gavel, then paused. Just briefly, as if considering something beyond the legal. Mr. Carter, he said, looking directly at my father, sometimes what reflects poorly on a family is not what its members do. My father opened his eyes, met the judge's gaze. It's what we choose not to see. The gavel came down, not loud, but decisive. The sound didn't echo. It settled, like everything else had. People began to move. Chairs scraping softly, papers being gathered, voices returning in low murmurs. The case was over. Legally. But that wasn't the part that mattered. I didn't move right away. Neither did my father. We sat there across from each other in the space left behind by everything that had just been said. There was no victory in it. No satisfaction. Just clarity. My father looked down at his hands, still clenched. Then slowly, deliberately, he relaxed them. Like he was letting go of something he had been holding on to for too long. I was wrong, he said. It was quiet, almost lost in the movement around us. But I heard it. It wasn't an apology. Not fully. It didn't undo anything. Didn't fix the years of distance. Didn't rewrite the past. But it was real. And for my father, that was something. I nodded once. Not in forgiveness. Not in acceptance. Just acknowledgement. He looked up at me again. Searching. For what I wasn't sure? Understanding. Maybe. Or permission. You didn't embarrass me, he said. His voice was rough now. Unsteady. I did that myself. I didn't respond right away. Because there are moments when words don't add anything. They just fill space. And this wasn't a moment that needed filling. Around us, the courtroom continued to empty. The lawyer gathered his files quickly, avoiding eye contact with both of us. The clerk moved papers from one stack to another. Life resuming. As if something hadn't just been quietly undone. My father stood. Slowly. Like he wasn't entirely sure his legs would cooperate. He looked at me one more time. Then nodded. A small gesture. But deliberate. And then, he turned and walked toward the exit. Not with the same confidence he had entered with. Not with the same certainty. But not broken either. Just changed. I watched him go. Not because I was waiting for something, but because for the first time, I didn't know what came next. When I finally stood, the room felt different. Lighter, maybe. Or maybe I was just carrying less. I gathered my folder. Slid it back into the leather case. Simple motions. Familiar. Grounding. As I walked toward the door, I reached into my pocket and felt the edge of the compass. Still there. Still steady. Still pointing somewhere certain. For years I had lived with the idea that being misunderstood was something you had to accept. That some people would never see you clearly. That you couldn't change that. Maybe that was true. But standing there in the quiet aftermath of everything that had just happened, I realized something else. You don't have to change what people see. You just have to stop standing in the version of yourself they created. And once you do, the truth has a way of finding its own direction. I stepped out of the courtroom and into whatever came next. I didn't leave the courthouse right away. Most people did. They always do once the decision is made, once the tension breaks, once the room no longer holds what they came to witness. But I stayed. Not because I needed to. Because I didn't know where else to go yet. The hallway outside the courtroom was quieter than before, the kind of quiet that follows something important, not empty, just settled. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, cutting long lines across the floor. Dust moved slowly in the air, almost suspended, like even it wasn't in a hurry to leave. I stood near the window, one hand resting lightly against the cool glass. For a moment I let myself feel it. Not victory. Not relief. Something softer. Release. A man in a worn veteran's cap walked past me, then stopped. He looked at me for a second, his eyes settling on the ribbons above my pocket. "Thank you for your service," he said. Simple. Direct. I nodded. "Thank you for yours." He smiled once, then kept walking. That was it. No questions. No expectations. Just recognition. The kind that doesn't ask you to explain anything. Outside, the air had changed. It always does after something like that. Cooler. Cleaner. Like the world had quietly reset itself while I wasn't looking. I stepped down the courthouse stairs slowly, my knee reminding me that some things don't reset at all. That they stay with you. Just quieter over time. My car was where I left it. Of course it was. Some things don't move unless you do. I stood beside it for a moment, keys in my hand, not quite ready to get in. That's the part people don't talk about. What happens after? After the confrontation. After the truth is spoken. After the moment you thought would change everything passes. I drove without a plan. Let the road decide. The town looked the same as it always had, storefronts, unchanged sidewalks worn in familiar patterns, people moving through their routines like nothing had shifted beneath them. Maybe nothing had. Not for them. I passed the old diner again. Slowed just slightly. Then kept going. Some places don't need revisiting. They've already given you what they were going to give. By the time I reached home, the sky had begun to soften toward evening. Knox was waiting at the door. He always was. His tail moved once, twice, slow but steady as I stepped inside. "Well," I said quietly, setting my keys down, "that's done." He leaned into my leg. Solid. Present. Uncomplicated. I scratched behind his ear, feeling the familiar grounding settle in. "You probably would have handled it better," I added. He huffed softly. Disagreeing. Or maybe just tired. I took off the uniform jacket and laid it carefully over the back of the chair. It looked the same as it had that morning. Pressed. Orderly. Still. But it felt different now. Not lighter. Just quieter. That night I slept. Really slept. Not the kind of sleep where your body shuts down but your mind keeps moving. The kind where everything finally stops. The next morning came without urgency. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, cutting soft lines across the kitchen floor. Knox circled his bowl, impatient in the way old dogs are, less energy, same expectations. I poured his food. Made coffee. Stood at the sink looking out at the yard. The fence still needed fixing. The boards were still warped. The nails still bent. Some things don't change overnight. They take time. Effort. Attention. The phone rang around 9. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Emily, my mother's voice. Soft. Careful. Yes. A pause. Not long. Just enough. We heard, she said. I figured. Another pause. He didn't know, she added quietly. I closed my eyes for a second. I know. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just full. He's been sitting on the porch all morning, she said. Hasn't said much. That sounded right. I don't think he knows what to do with it, she continued. Most people don't, I replied. We didn't talk long after that. We didn't need to. Some conversations don't require length. Just honesty. That afternoon I drove out to the old family property. The one at the center of everything. It looked the same as always. Weathered. Steady. Still standing. I walked the perimeter, slowly checking the boards, the foundation, the small details no one notices until something breaks. Under the porch rail, the initials were still there. Carved decades ago. Faded but not gone. I ran my thumb over them. Familiar. Permanent. You kept it in good shape. The voice came from behind me. I didn't turn right away. I knew who it was. I tried, I said. My father stepped up beside me. Not too close. Not distant either. Just there. We stood in silence for a moment, looking at the same thing. Maybe seeing it differently. I watched that clip, he said finally. What clip? The evacuation, he replied. News segment, it's still online. Of course it was. I didn't know, he added again. I nodded. I know. He shifted his weight hands in his pockets. I always thought, he started. Then stopped. Tried again. I thought if you weren't here, it meant you didn't care. I looked at him. It meant I didn't feel welcome. He winced. Just slightly. But enough. I was wrong, he said. There it was again. Same words. Different place. Different weight. I didn't rush to respond. Didn't need to. Some things take time to land. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. Small. Metal. Worn. My grandfather's watch. I kept this, he said. Didn't know what to do with it. He held it out. I think I do now. I took it. Carefully. The weight of it familiar even after all these years. Thank you, I said. He nodded once. Then stepped back. Not leaving. Not staying. Just giving space. As the sun began to set, the light stretched across the field in long, quiet lines. We stood there a little longer. Not talking. Not fixing everything. Just standing. Because sometimes that's where it starts. Not with apologies. Not with explanations. But with the simple act of staying. Later that night, back at the house, I placed the watch on the table beside the compass. Two things pointing in different ways. Both steady. Both certain. I didn't know what would come next. Not exactly. But for the first time, that didn't feel like something to worry about. Because the truth had already done its work. It had stepped into the light. And it didn't need me to defend it anymore. If this story reminded you of someone you haven't spoken to, someone you misunderstood, or someone who never really felt seen, take a moment. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we never start. And sometimes, all it takes is one question we should have asked a long time ago. If you felt something in this story, share it. Let me know where you're listening from. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. We have more stories like this, quiet, real, and worth telling. So if you don't want to miss them, stay with us. Let's keep walking this path together.